Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. And today's first show is on my editorial from a few weeks ago, Why I'm Tired of the Swamp. And we welcome Brother Alexis Bonello to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on Order Militaris Radio TV.
I'm just going to read the editorial, then we'll get into some discussion. We'll go from there. After learning and sharing the history of my Polish heritage with the world of the PS dynasty, I am truly a monarchist, not like the modern sense of this group who call themselves monarchists, but truly am, even though just a Kansas farm boy. But through my mother, born to the whole royal houses of Europe, and I now see the strengths of the monarchy over the type of government we have here. I love to have the monarchy in the USA, and this blow is a dream if it were to happen. The Marxist terrorists would not be given any room to grow. Spies used to infiltrate in their organization shut down. Any violence done to the people would be enough for serious charges to either life or capital punishment. Threatening to burn down an entire apartment building with people in it should right there be enough to have them rounded up and sent for capital punishment, not life in prison. This whole madness with the tyranny of governors forcing people to mask up and charging huge fines to people for not wearing the masks, and the idiot statements by the quack Dr. Fauci and Birx. They would be removed from their post, brought up on charges for using false information by a known corrupted organization to shut down the entire economy of the United States of America, and also causing numerous deaths for not allowing actual real doctors to prescribe hydrochloroquine to save lives, and working to have Fauci's line his pockets with the grants of the numerous vaccine trials his National Institute of Health put money into. We would follow Holland and Sweden, where numbers are dropping and aren't even maybe at zero. I would then make sure our monarchy lived on by heirs, like the PS dynasty, not the elected monarchy. Each relative or son we brought up in the scholasticum and true Catholic education. The universities that say they are Catholic would be cleaned out and properly restored. All bad sexual predator bishops and gay-friendly bishops will be removed. Even letters of calling for their dismissal from the priesthood. Any priest who taught heresy removed, and the same letters issued. Homeschool encouraged and large families encouraged. Proper Catholic courtship taught and proper Catholic marriage prep restored. Masterful giant statues of Christ the King and our Blessed Mother built and put in giant monuments, larger than the Masonic temples of Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. And Our Lady and Christ the King would be crowned. A truly Catholic constitution developed, passed, and signed. Each person can greet and speak with the king. And yes, each section of the country will have representatives to bring issues to the king and his cabinet. Bill Gates and his vaccine cronies and organizations would be outlawed. All life of innocent protected, from unborn to the elderly and the infirm. Gay marriage would be outlawed. Traditional marriage of one woman and one man enshrined into law. Proper police training given and police supported. The U.S. military academies reformed to be Catholic military academies. Abortion, contraception, pornography outlawed. That all the composers and music artists need a license from the king so that no bad music is permitted to be made. Since we don't have a Congress, Since we won't have a Congress as we do now, the Congress building will be a Senate of the Noble that I will select. The Masonic front of the Supreme Court will be demolished and restored that is fully Catholic. And Catholics who uphold the complete faith and make faithful judgments will be selected. Those who try to compromise and make injustice rulings will face prison for life.
I can see you have the blood of nobles in you, AJ. Laying aside all other issues, if a Catholic were to hear that essay and read it, why wouldn't he say this is what we need? We're going to keep fooling ourselves and thinking that the Masonic system is going to save us. We now have a country run by people who are insane. They're psychotic. they're psychopathic, and they're destroying the country. And just to give an example, if we allow our state governor to outlaw hydrochloroquine, we're allowing him to murder tens of thousands of our citizens. And that blood is on us too. So not to rebel, not to change the whole system seems to me inconscionable on the question of the duty we have to protect everyone's life and the life of Indians. What happened to Germany when Germans allowed insane people to come to power? 40 million people died. And we're at that point in the United States. People think the election is going to save America. It's not going to save America because both groups on the ballot want to force that vaccine on everyone, and don't seem to be doing anything to require the proper treatments being used like hydrochloroquine, because then the vaccine would be useless or unnecessary.
Yeah. I was preparing for at least part one of the first show for today, this one. I was reading through and scratching out New Zealand since they caved. And now they're going into a second lockdown.
Yeah, New Zealand banned the guns because, some nut might shoot a Muslim. Now that people are disarmed, they're establishing concentration camps for people who have COVID-19. And you have to understand, since the test declares that everyone has it, it's just a rubber stamp to imprison you and take away your liberty. It's not a pandemic here. There's a communist revolution going on. That's what's going on. And all the Masonic parties are involved in it.
I was looking through, okay, we're talking about the masks and the vaccines and hydrochloroquine. I was like, what type of healthcare insurance would a monarchy issue for the people?
There's the big question in political theory whether the state should even be involved in healthcare. Before modern times, the state was never involved. Healthcare was always considered something private, and it seems that it has to be private nearly all the time, because everyone's health is different than every other health. The hypothetical case of something like a Black Death, where a third of the population is going to die in 3 months, these things have happened in the past, but in modern medicine, they could never happen again. I don't believe so. And the boogeyman that somewhere in some jungle there might be a virus that comes forth and wipes humanity is just a propaganda tool of the vaccine and medical industries and certain political parties, like they use climate warming or global warming or whatever, overpopulation, some kind of boogeyman to fear you, to get you to accept their agenda. But we shouldn't take action except on reality, not on the basis of fear, okay? So until it's proven to exist, we shouldn't fear it. Otherwise, we'd fear every possible thing that could possibly ever be in every possible world, and that's just insanity.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as the question of general healthcare the reason why healthcare came about, because as the Industrial Revolution proceeded, a lot of people had health problems because Pollution wasn't understood, toxicity wasn't understood. A lot of people getting sick from the Industrial Revolution, and since they were being paid meager salaries, there was no way they could get health care. So a lot of governments started instituting national healthcare systems. That's not really a problem any longer, because the way to get everyone healthy is to make sure the environment is clean and the air is clean and workers have rights, so they have enough money to take care of their health and they're not put in danger during their job. And once you solve the causes of bad health, then a need for a healthcare system kind of evaporates. Although there's always some need of it. For example, veterans who are injured in war, the state really has an obligation to take care of them because they're the ones that put them at risk and they serve their country. But a healthcare system that has to do with elective surgeries, things that people would like done but aren't necessary, is that really the duty of the state? That should be something that's more their own personal decision.
Yeah.
Then there's problems where people don't want cures and maybe need them, like drug addicts and alcoholics. Maybe a healthcare system needs to adjust that. So it's a hotly debated point, because once the state enters in healthcare, then politics is mixing with medicine, and that's bad practice, because medicine regards saving lives and the health of the individual, whereas politics should regard the common good, and we don't all have the same health issues, and some of us have no health issues. So,
yeah. Along with that, I would also have all the medical schools fixed, where they're not wacko, crazy, liberal people who all just treat a patient like a pincushion or a guinea pig, and they actually learn the actual Greek and learn the actual oath.
yeah, one of the big problems of medicine is a doctor can do a lot of good, but he can also do a lot of evil. I think the current leader of Syria is a former dentist. And he's made political statements about governing this country the way you would pull out teeth. And pulling out teeth is the right thing to do in many problems in the mouth, but that's not the concept in politics. You pull out teeth, meaning extract people from society. But doctors need to be ethical and moral people. How can someone who doesn't accept Christian ethics, which is the highest form of ethics that's ever existed on earth, practice medicine ethically, and does the government really want that kind of thing going on? So the whole problems with like euthanasia, abortion, sex change operations are coming from that part of the medical world, which is completely unethical. And I think in a Catholic monarchy would have to be outlawed, if not eliminated. And then there has to be a reform of their medical schools, because in most medical schools, they're not taught ethics of anything. And that should be a requirement. If the person is not ethical, he shouldn't even be allowed to study medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Need to relearn. I don't know what they learned, but probably the actual work of ethics.
Yeah, there is in the Catholic system, we do have a moral ethics on medicine, and the Hippocratic Oath is a high ideal, but the Christian ideal is even higher than that. So it could be taught, but it would have to be, you need a background check before you go in. You need a psychological exam. If you're psychotic or psychopathic or sociopathic, you should not be allowed to take medicine. And then you have to be asked basic questions. Do you hold that human life begins at conception? If they say no, then obviously they're not fit to be a doctor. They don't accept the most basic truths of biology. And do you think there's only two genders or more genders? Because if they say there's more than two, then they're psychotic. And people like that should not be allowed in medicine. So there needs to be much higher standards than there are. Many states, the doctors are now so unethical, people fear to go to the hospitals. And I think in the lockdown, the tens of thousands that did die, hundreds of thousands that did die, is because a lot of unethical practices were going on. And that destroys healthcare of everyone, because people don't trust to go to the doctor or hospital anymore. Then how are they going to get their health issues addressed?
Yeah. Before Dish took away OANN News, and when we finally switched back to Dish after the horrible DirecTV, you'd watch OANN and see their actual investigation shows, which were good, about how different areas in Ohio, Tennessee, and a few other places where doctors were really handing out the horrible drugs in a large quantity.
Yeah, the opioid crisis is a direct consequences of the moral breakdown of the medical profession. And they actually took steps that would make kids drug addicts because they were making a big cut on pushing opioids.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows you the absolute abysmal moral state of the medical profession. And this has reduced medical care in the United States to a level, the lowest it's been in my lifetime. It used to be very high in its standards, and now it's just absolutely unreliable.
Yeah. Next would be, how would the banking systems and all that things economic would be taken back to the people and not allow the powerful elites of the world to rule.
Yeah, so the whole concept of banks was invented by Catholics in Italy, because they saw how the Jews were exploiting people with outrageous interest rates. So they established a bank, and the word bank comes from the Italian word for a board of shelving lumber that was put on two supports, and the money changer would sit there with the money, counting the coins and stuff, and that was the bank. And it was designed to give low interest rates to honorable, upright people, and enable Christians to get involved in businesses. And that's why in the Renaissance, the leading economic powerhouse of Europe was Italy and the Italian commercial republics, because of the banking. So the problem is that down through the centuries, the Jews have gotten control of most of the banks, and their ideas of how to exploit people with financial instruments have entered into the general culture of banking. And so banking now is a predatory economic activity where wealth is extracted from people, and only the certain friends of people who are friendly to the people who control the banks are enabled to become wealthy. And so we've suffered a cultural and economic revolution in the last 200 and 300 years through banking. And it's really corrupted society and put people in power who don't represent the actual belief of the people in the nation. So Jewish financiers and secular financiers basically control the West, even though the mass of people don't share any belief with these people. So one of the first things in a Christian monarchy would be to nationalize the banks and to take the whole institution of financing away from them, because they have no right to it, and they're a foreign influence, and they're unethical, and they destabilize the state, and they're a criminal operation in the moral sense of the word, because what they are doing in most countries is legal. But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's not criminal in the moral sense of the word, because the moral law is higher than the written law. And a Catholic monarchy should follow the moral law, not the written laws of men, which could be corrupt. And this makes a lot of sense too, because who really generates the wealth in society? It's each of us, by our life, our work, our creativity, our industry, our thought. We're building on the material culture of our ancestors. We're adding to it. We're improving it. Every generation invents new tools, new ideas, new machines, new concepts, new processes, new literature, new movies, new everything. Okay, we're building on the material culture of all our ancestors, whether we respect it or not, or we are creative or more traditional. So all that wealth is being added by the people. It's not being added by the bank. And since money is merely an instrument of exchange, it has no value of itself unless it's made of gold or silver, but even then it's valued by exchange. It's our decisions in the marketplace that decide how much a thing is worth. If you like, you know, American cheese slices, you go to the supermarket and the package is $2.20. You go to another supermarket and it's $2.10. You can buy it at the supermarket, it's $2.10. You are affecting the price of cheese slices nationwide by that one decision. If you're willing to pay $5.50 for a pack of cheddar cheese, natural aged slices, aged 9 months in Vermont, then you are also affecting the market. But since you're making that decision only to a high quality kind of cheese, it doesn't affect the market in the same way. So prices are actually created by the people, their willingness to pay or not. And that's why governments that have attempted price controls like Diocletian from the 4th century and onward have just totally ruined their economies. But that also means that the banks should not have the right to create capital. See, a bank in modern time creates capital by loaning more money than it has, okay? And it loans it in cash or in...
Oh, we touched on topics people don't like. We'll be back in a little bit. But Brother Alexis, stay tuned. Yeah.
time. It has to be... have you lost me?
Just a little bit.
Okay, I guess we're affecting some sensor out there. So at the same time, it has to be within limits. The government can't create wealth out of thin air beyond certain limits because it affects the whole economy and destroys people's savings. One of the biggest problems in modern times is people spend their whole life hoping to own a house, they pay a mortgage or save their money. But by the time they retire, their money is not worth what it was when they began. Okay, I'll take an example from my own family. My father, he began working in like 56, and in 56 you could buy a house for $20,000, $20,000, and he bought a nice house in Morristown for I think it was like $30,000, and he would have paid it off in 8 years. Okay, with the salary he had in 1962. Okay, by the time he died, he only had $40,000 in the bank, and he didn't even own the house he was living in because his work made him, he had to move, and he could never save, and his salary remained constant, where the price of housing went up more than tenfold, went up 20-fold. So most people today, the average kid getting out of college, if he doesn't have debt, and most of them take loans and leave college with massive debt. But if he didn't have any debt, he would never even be able to save enough money to buy a house and have it by the end, unless he had a high-paying job or something. So this new generation will not be property owners. They'll be living in apartments, and that means all their wealth will be going to landlords. And is that the American dream? No, it's not. Okay, so what's happened? What has happened is that the value of the dollar has been deflated by massive government overspending. I think in the Second World War, the U.S. government was only like 35 billion in debt or 55 billion in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Now the debt is around 20,000 billions. Okay, it's called 20 trillion, but I'll say 20,000 billions to show you that there has, and what the cause of that has made the dollar devalue to something like 1/20th of its original value. I remember as a kid, you could buy potatoes for like 20 cents a pound. You could buy a loaf of bread for 65 cents, and butter was like, 98 cents a pound, and milk, a gallon of milk was under $1. You can't touch any of those foods now. I mean, a loaf of bread is like $5. That's unbelievable. And a loaf of bread was only $2 in the 90s, and now it's $5. And that means your money that you're saving in cash is getting always smaller in value. And what the result is if you spent your whole life working as a slave, they make it appear that you're making money, but that money is always getting less in value. And so at the end, you have nothing and you've worked as a slave. And modern society is actually a slave economy because the value of money is not protected, neither by the government nor by the banks. In a Catholic monarchy, the protection of the value of the money is one of the first duties of national defense. That if you can defend the savings of the people, then the people will have more power and the elitists will have less. Okay, because they can always move their wealth around from one thing to another. It doesn't change value.
Yeah.
So yeah, the banks have to be radically reformed, and then loans have to be given out according to economic reasons. It can't be my friends only. It can't be that kind of thing at all. So you would need a law that would say in the banking industry, the people who run the companies have to be of the same ethnicity as the whole country. So if your ethnicity is 1/10 of the whole population, then only 1/10 of the whole board of directors of all banks could be your ethnicity, no more. Because no ethnicity, which is a minority, should be able to dominate any sector of the economy and therefore oppress the majority. And that would eliminate you-know-who from controlling the world because they're obsessed with it. Christians aren't obsessed with controlling the world. Our desire is to enjoy life and live for God and live for a better world. But we do have to protect ourselves from people who want to conquer the world and enslave us.
You're speaking about housing, and I was just thinking to, the good old days where when the government would put an ad in the paper back in the 1800s saying, if you head west, there's land for taking. But the one thing is, you have to survive a year, have crops grow, and survive, and build a good homestead.
Things like that made America great. And America started going down with like the law that was passed by Congress that allowed railways to seize all land within 50 miles of their railroad and take away homesteaders' land. That was after the Civil War. After the Civil War, America is no longer a country for the people. It's a country for financiers and industrialists, and the people really get oppressed. And that has a lot to do with the motives of the Civil War and the motives Lincoln had for maintaining the Union at all costs, where the Constitution is no longer read the same way it was read before the war. And so that's one of the general, and that's why in the United States today, the companies have all the power, the people have no power. If the factory down the road is polluting the environment and causing everyone to die in your neighborhood of cancer, there's really nothing you can do about it anymore. In the 70s, you could sue maybe and get something, but now you can't, you could never prove that they were actually doing anything. It's very difficult. And that's because the companies realized to get around the law, they just went to Washington and bribed the politicians. And now the federal government, as many say, is really a criminal organization, and it's a parasite on the nation. And people call it the swamp, and that is a good term for it. But it's not the kind of swamp that is biologically active. It's kind of the swamp of a septic system, just full of rotting and stinky things.
In the original monarchies of Christendom, how was the news done, and did those who were journalists had to receive a special license from the crown? And how to make sure no more bias, fake news, fear-mongering would ever be spread again?
Okay, so journalism, I believe, is a profession. It has its origins in the 16th or 17th centuries. Because before that, anyone who heard news would get on, for example, a ship would dock at port in your country from a foreign land, and the sailors on board would have news. It would immediately end up in the pubs. And if it wasn't important, someone would get on horseback and ride off to the king or the nearby city announcing news. And I don't think they were even paid for it. It was just like, I want to let everyone know what I've heard. And they would yell it in the crowd. They would yell it in the piazzas. And if there was any official news from the government, then a herald will go into the town crier, or the herald will go into the main square of the town and read it out loud at certain hours of the day. Then with the advent of printing, they published it, and there were certain places in town where there would be papers published with news or decrees or things like that. And some gotten the idea of actually publishing own private news, and they started newspapers. Okay, and it pretty much was just completely more like the newspapers you see at the checkout in the supermarket. All kinds of wild stories, and whether it's true or not, no one knew. There was really no ethics in it all. It was just sell that paper. But the modern systems of journalism were organized by Jews, Reuters, UPI, API, APF, Agence Presse Française. All the main news outlets were started by Jews in the 1820s, 30s, because they realized that if you could control news, you could control governments and financial markets. And Rothschilds were big on this because if they knew in advance a company went bankrupt, they could dump all its stock, okay? Or they could issue a story saying a company's going bankrupt and have its stock plummet to nothing and then buy it all up in pennies. And so they organized these news agencies, and nearly all the founders were Jewish Marxists, and they were all working for people like Rothschilds. And within 100 years, they had captured a good part of the political and economic control of the whole West using newspapers and news agencies and telegraph wires and systems like that. Very clever, very devious, and very dishonest. So do they have a right to all that wealth? I would argue no, they don't. They committed a crime, and that needs to be rectified. A Catholic monarchy would need to rectify that, and would take a lot of good historical accounting to go through just what crimes were committed when, what speculation was done, and what. And there's a lot of wealthy companies today that are heirs of companies that committed horrible crimes, and they were never punished. And we see that even today in the speculations of the stock market. Most of them are highly criminal, but they're not punished because once in charge, they pass laws to allow their crimes to be declared legal. Okay. So the newspapers do need to be regulated. It needs to be news that everyone has equal access to, and insider trading has to be completely eliminated. There has to be a much higher ethics in journalism. Journalism really has no ethics anymore. It's become a tool of political manipulation. Yeah. So information is so important that almost needs to be laws about the ethics of it that are as strict as selling securities, stocks, and bonds. And it doesn't yet exist. But most of these international organizations, they need to be outlawed. You have to understand that if you're approached by a reporter from any of these agencies like Reuters, API, APF, UPI, they're criminals, and they're out to deceive the world, and anything you say to them, they will twist. And a good Catholic monarchy, they'd be expelled from the country or arrested because they're just involved in psychological or information manipulation of other people. And that's the whole purpose of the organization. They try to pretend to be pharisaically pure, upright, and professional. They're far from it. They're completely dishonest people.
Yeah. After watching President Trump's press briefings and his press secretary's press briefings, I was like, it would be, if the Crown would have a press briefing, and if journalists would get out of control like you would see on those press briefings, they would one, lose their license, two, be out of whatever press association thing, so they can go to these press briefings. 3, prison.
Well, you have to understand in the United States, all the networks are controlled by these kinds of organizations, and they should all lose their licenses even if they don't violate them, because they've already violated it so many times. I think that the licenses to broadcast shouldn't be in the hands of companies. I think they should be in the hands of the people, so that the journalist who's reading the nightly news is someone whom the people have chosen or has shown to be ethically upright person his whole career.
Yeah.
In news, and not affiliated with any political party or institution, kind of like a profession on itself, like doctors are certified, journalists need to be certified. And you wouldn't have all those antics, okay? You would have the actual real news. One of the big problems of Masonic society is the Masons want to remain in power. And to remain in power, they are very astute. The first thing they do is they want you to not think that they exist. Because as long as you're mad at anything else, you'll never mobilize to take them out of power.
Mm-hmm.
So they create all these antics on television and in the news all the time, so that you're always pointing the finger at someone else, okay? Or you think that this side is your friend and that side is your enemy, when both are really Masonic. And I think the press briefings in the White House under Trump have been an excellent dynamic of that kind of theater. Because no sane person allows himself to be heckled day in, day and night in his own house.
Yeah.
Unless he's gaining something from it. And that makes him look like the hero, and he's persecuted, and you have sympathy for him, and therefore you trust him. But all the while he lets the lockdown go on, and he pushes the vaccine. He doesn't build the wall, and he stops Christians immigrating from the U.S., and he moves the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and he doesn't eliminate ISIS, and he does almost everything Obama would have done.
Yeah.
Oh, and he approves of gay marriage. That's the agenda of Obama. Is that Trump? That's not the Trump I vote. Anyone? I don't think it's the Trump anyone voted for.
Well, under such a monarchy, could the true teaching orders sprout up again? How to make sure they truly were faithful to their founders, not teaching some Marxist crud. That's why if people need to send their kids to school after a few years of homeschooling, they can and will continue the same education.
Yeah, I mean, the state can regulate education and certainly make sure that the book's being used on communists, but restoring the teaching orders today would be very difficult, because the church has been taken over top to bottom almost 99% by the enemies of Christ and people who don't believe in Jesus Christ, even though they say the Latin Mass all the day. Because if they believe in Jesus Christ, they'd call Bergoglio out as a heretic. They wouldn't name him again in the Mass, and they don't even have that much virility, you know. So you would first have to renew the whole priesthood, okay? And I've long thought that our Lord foresaw these days, because when he chose his apostles, he chose one apostle who had never married. That was John the Apostle.
Mm-hmm.
All the others were widowers. So he didn't choose men who had never married a woman. 11 of his 12 apostles were married men whose wives had passed away, or who left their wives to follow the Lord. So he made sure he chose men. And I myself am celibate. I've never married, but I think that's the most prudent thing, because there's just so many ways of people faking it, okay? And if the guy's raised a family and had children, and then in his older years decided to serve the Lord, leave his wife and kids, then you're getting someone who's sane, in touch with reality, and trustworthy to rule over a family, and he knows what it means to be a father. Whereas these others is like they're using the priesthood to conceal their own vice. And that's true now of nearly all the priests. I would say more than 80% of the priests are homosexual, and you should not trust them with your sons, not in the least, okay? And that's not true in other nations. And some nations, they have all women on the side. What's the purpose of that? You know, where's your honesty in that? Or some older man, he no longer has the desires of the flesh, so it's easy for him to focus on God. And there's nothing saying that you have to ordain young men when they can't ordain old men. And there's nothing to say that your priest has to go through 9 years of training to become a priest. If he knows the Catechism of the Council of Trent, knows how to say the Mass, that's sufficient. Read St. Alphonsus' moral theology, that's sufficient. He doesn't have to have 9 years of indoctrination, which is just a system to turn people to modernists and Marxists, and to weed out anyone Catholic by watching them 9 years, like in a concentration camp. So first you'd have to renew the priesthood, and then you could restore the teaching orders. A government can help a lot in that by, I think a good Catholic government should require all men after high school to go military duty for 2 years. Teach them some discipline, and then find out what they're like. If they show any signs of homosexuality while they're in the military, they need to be marked. Their identification card from then on needs to be marked. They can't be allowed into schools, into church institutions. They can't be allowed into any place they might prey on people, exploit people, have any kind of influence, not working in hotels, restaurants, arts, theaters, anything like that. And this is not discrimination. They suffer from a serious moral disorder, and the society needs to protect itself from that.
Yeah.
And we're only talking about 0.5% of the population, so it's not much, but there are cures, and the state should employ those for those who want to be cured. But for those who want to be cured, they have to be blacklisted from spreading their vice around society. And same thing with pedophiles. Pedophiles should be put to death. There should be no toleration of that, because otherwise it spreads. And any kind of perverse sexual abuse, they should get the death penalty. Middle Ages, there was death penalty even for sodomy among consenting adults. And that's a good punishment because it's so foul and twisted. People who are willing to go to that are just whacked out. Okay. Let them make a good confession and send them to God for judgment. And those would be considered medieval concepts. That was the Catholic concept. But we're living in a society now so Masonic. To say these things might get you imprisoned in some countries, even though we're just reciting historic beliefs. But the Catholic religion has basically been outlawed in all countries.
Yeah. Thinking like, what would a good cabinet be of advisors who would, the people would talk to the king and see the advisors, and the advisors would hear the people. Then they, sit down and then discuss among themselves and with the people and make those decisions.
If there perhaps was one weakness in historically in Christian monarchies, it was the cabinet, the king's council, barons who were trying to get his favor so they could profit for themselves. I kind of think that, if the king needs a counselor on banking, he should have a team of academic experts in banking, and they should elect one of their own to, report to the king. But they shouldn't really have any political power. They should just be expert advice. Mm-hmm. I think what you say is it's a good example that the people have some sort of legislature where they can propose a law to the king, but it's the king who decides what sections are going in and what is not, Because in modern governments, there's so much complexity. The more people that look at the problem and give their opinion, the better the law that's going to come out. If even a law is required, in many cases, it's just not required. Good morals is what's required. If the 12 commandments were kept, you wouldn't need 99% of all laws. So how to choose a cabinet, that's a difficult thing. And that's the weakness in a monarchy, because a king could be persuaded to choose someone. Well, just use an example. Trump had among his inner circles of advisors a man, I won't mention his name, who was recently charged by a federal court for embezzlement from a charity. And I long suspected that he was dismissed from the administration because Trump knew something this guy was involved in, but didn't want to say it because he didn't want to hurt the guy's reputation. He wanted the investigation to go on. And I won't mention his name because it could be that he's innocent. But here's an example of someone who, and there have been many cases in the past, I'm not just talking about this one individual, where people seem to be very honest, but their motives for counseling the king or the president or the prime minister are really very selfish. This one individual's worth $48 million, and yet he's constantly asked money. He wants to restore a monastery here in Italy to his institute for training people in politics, and he's asking people to donate money. He has the money. Why does it he has to ask people to donate it? It's not even 25% of his total wealth. So there's a lot of people like this who get involved in politics or charity, but it's really to enrich themselves. And because the noble thing to do is, if you have enough money to fix up a monastery, you fix it up with your own money. You don't ask anyone for money to do it. I can see a friar like myself who doesn't have a penny. Then you ask people with money because you have no money. But you see a lot of this, even talking heads. They have money and they're constantly asking money. That is theft of charity that belongs to the poor, belongs to the church. And you should always ask people when you're going to ask for a donation, is this money going to someone's pocket, or is it going to actually apostolic or charitable work? It doesn't matter how many times the thing pops up on the screen, says, give us money. Where's the money going? And most of these things are for profit. I could name every single Catholic apostle out there, so-called Catholic apostle out there where you get your news. None of them are apostolates. They're all family businesses to make themselves wealthy.
Yeah. And this idea of what to use the Congress building for and Senate of the Nobles, what would they do?
Well, in the Middle Ages, most people don't realize there were senates of nobles. Okay, the nobles would be called together. They had different names in different countries: diet or council or parliament. And when the people with the power in the country, who had the land and had controls of the military units and the courts, came together to discuss things, they made very prudent decisions. And they usually didn't meet once, but every 20, 30, 50, 100 years. Because laws don't really need to change. There's the same problems from every generation onward. Okay. And so they were very conservative, and there wasn't much politicking going on. We waste so much of our day, our life, of our year getting informed about what's going on in politics, and it produces nothing. It's just a complete waste of time. Mm-hmm. And it's totally unnecessary, where you could concentrate on much better things, enjoying life, making the next generation, prosperity for the next generation, praying to God, seeking holiness. All this politicking is just a completely false social activity. It's totally unnecessary.
And learning about Saint Stephen of Hungary yesterday and his 2 law books, and just that one quote from it, I was like, oh yeah. When the government is, when, whatever, God wills it, we would find a rare copy, since there's like maybe one in the entire United States. We found out yesterday. I was like, huh. And we would base a lot of it off of his laws.
Mm-hmm. We have, in the COVID-19 scamdemic, it's a complete scam, we see that the left has totally abandoned democracy and established a monarchy. Mm-hmm. The monarchy is the governor or Fauci declaring that something must be done. He has no authority, but everyone obeys him. And he doesn't really tell you exactly what's lawful or not. The governor then issues the same decree, and then the mayor issues the same decree, and you could be arrested for not wearing a mask in one town in a certain place, where in a town on the other side of the country you wouldn't be arrested at all. It's just like uneven. And that's kind of like the medieval system, where the laws were not specified and each local authority determined what the violation would be or when it was violated. But their whole system's based on a lie, and it is opposed to Christ and the Christian religion. Why are we obeying it? If the whole purpose of America was to liberate ourselves from an unjust monarch in England, why are we obeying these people who are infinitely more unjust?
Yeah.
So our non-action is enslaving us. Whereas in a Catholic order system, there'd be a law like fornication is illegal. Then the governor would say prostitution is outlawed. And the mayor would say, if any women scantily dressed or standing on street corners, they should be arrested as suspect of prostitutes. That's the way of a general law being locally interpreted. Okay, and that's a good Catholic system, because then the national government doesn't have to worry about all the details of it. Let the local decide what it is, because the way young women dress and where they stand in the town might differ. Maybe in Southern California, prostitutes stand on the street corner, but maybe in New York City, they're in a special building, okay, run by a guy calls it a nightclub. You don't know how it expresses itself. You can't establish one law for the whole nation. It's going to be different in different places. And we need to rebel against the whole anti-Christic form of monarchy that we've been put under purposely, because they're preparing us for the coming of the Antichrist, and establish a Catholic system. And Catholics who don't want to do that are Freemasons. You're not Catholic and you're going to hell. You're a heretic and you're apostate, because you believe the Antichrist should reign in this world. Any Catholic who believes that the state should be completely secular and separated from Christ, you're not even a Christian, and Christ will not recognize you. You have to accept him as your king, and that is not a religious doctrine. That's also a political doctrine. Christ is also your king in the political order. If you don't believe that, you're not a Christian, because Christ said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. He didn't just say religious authority over the church. So this is really an imperative right now. It's a question of survival or extermination if you don't accept a Catholic concept of politics and start organizing it. If you don't trust in Christ, then you won't believe that that's possible. But if you do, you see that's quite easy.
Yeah. That's where the massive statues across the country would be of our Christ the King and Our Lady. Each set would be crowned in each different locations.
Yeah, and if you propose that as a Catholic, people would look at you as a fanatic. But the Masons have that already, and why does no one think it's fanatical that there is this woman standing at the entrance to the harbor of New York who represents nothing? And it's a statue, and people go there almost out of devotion. Why can't we replace that and put a statue of the Immaculate Conception there?
Mm-hmm.
The liberals would go crazy. Every single one of them, whether they call themselves Christian, Muslim, or Jew. But they have no problem with the Statue of Liberty, a Roman goddess.
Mm-hmm.
It's a two-faced ideology. Whereas the Statue of Our Lady would bring blessings to the city and encourage people in the life of virtue and humanity. And the Statue of Liberty doesn't inspire people to do anything whatsoever. It just costs money to maintain.
Yeah. So stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about our Queenship of Our Lady. This is Border Militaris Radio signing off for a moment. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.